It is always fun to welcome back colleagues and friends to the show. And so, Dr. Julie Slattery, it is so good to see you again.
It's good to see you. Thanks for having me on.
And I love the fact that the history we have, we've had lots of times where our paths have intersected in person or for sure in the blogging and the video and in the podcast world. But one of the things that I've loved about the way you approach things, Julie, is you have a tact to you that is I kind of call it a gentle firm, that you're fairly unwavering in how you're going about it, but you're also very gentle in it. And that's a real good gift, Julie. So well done so far on how it's been working for you.
Well, thank you. That's an encouragement. And I feel like every time you and I have talked, I walk away with some new insight or challenge. So it's always been, I know we're recording for people to hear this, but for me, it's always been like just like a great conversation of two people who really care about this topic. And it's fun to learn from you.
Likewise. And so let's jump right in because you've got a new book that's just come out. And obviously with the impetus to create it was it's if you're like me, there's lots of different things that lead to this, but the one thing that you
Yeah.
keep coming back to that I keep seeing is this world of Christian sexuality, and how, man, it's an interesting one to try to dive into. And so how has this unfolded for you? Let's go there to start.
Yeah, so I think like this week we're celebrating 13 years of ministry at Authentic Intimacy. So, boy, when I started this whole thing, I didn't know what I didn't know. So
Mhm.
it began with sort of this heart of how do we help Christians like wrestle with sexual issues? How do we help them know that God cares about this part of their life? I have learned so much. I continue to learn a lot personally and professionally, and I guess the culmination of the things that I've learned in this particular book called Surrendered Sexuality is really the whole idea that I think a lot of us who have a faith in God, who would claim to be Christians, sort of flirt with the idea of God informing our sexuality, but we're not really all in on that. It's sort of like, well, I'm gonna manage this on my own. I'm not quite so sure if I can trust God with this part
Right.
of my life. And maybe he can help me a little bit. But if we look at the Bible and we look at what it means to be a Christian, then that actually is not the right approach. That's going
Hmm.
to get us in probably more trouble than if we never even tried to do any of it in the first place. So it's this book is really about asking the question like what would it actually look like? What does it mean to say that I want to worship God, I want to serve God with all of my life, specifically with my sexuality. So that's kind of what I tackle in that book.
That's so good. And so what is it that makes it to where we can have such a struggle attributing this aspect of our life to God, and actually, and then as you describe it, surrendering and handing it over to him?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of elements to it. First of all, we don't have really good role models or conversations. We haven't talked about sexuality very honestly in the church historically. And so we don't know what it looks like. We haven't had that taught to us or lived out. I think it also is inherently such a personal part of us that we're not quite so sure we want anyone in. Like even
Hmm.
in a marriage relationship or an intimate relationship, we might share our bodies with somebody, but to have somebody really into the space of our fears, our shame, our fantasies, all of it, it's like, wow, that's like my space only.
No, yeah, do not enter, no one else allowed.
Yeah.
Because do you even find the same thing where a lot of times we can even be unsure about entering it into ourselves, of like,
Yeah, we don't
I
want
don't
to
even
think
know
about
if
it.
I want to acknowledge that part of myself either.
It is so true. I mean, sometimes when I'm speaking and I say like, you were created by God as a sexual person. Like at a surface level, we can all kind of nod our head, but if you let yourself sit with that, some people get really uncomfortable. And then when you get to the deeper layers of, again, all the secrets that we keep, all the desires that we don't want to acknowledge, the things in our past that we'd rather just forget about, we don't want anybody there. And so it makes us extremely uncomfortable to think about the fact that God knows everything, that the Bible
Hmm.
tells us there's nowhere we can go from his presence. There's no thought we can have that he didn't know about.
Hmm.
And we're like, wow, I don't know how to feel about that. So, yeah, so I think that that makes us uncomfortable integrating our faith with our sexuality. And then there's a lot of shame. I think
Hmm.
a lot of us try to approach faith and our relationship with God with trying to do more and try harder. And so the typical approach is I need to clean up my behavior
Right.
before I can bring this to
Right.
God. Like I don't want him in the mess. So those are some of the thoughts.
Right. And so that means that a lot of times we might have this human default leaning towards my sexuality is therefore at least a negative or a dirty or a bad thing. And that, so if I don't get that cleaned up, how in the world would God pursue me? How in the world could I be comfortable with that parts of myself?
Yeah, like this is a part of myself that I'm not even sure I accept.
Hmm.
And so surely God would reject me and is rejecting me because of the things I struggle with or I think about, or frankly, I don't trust him with it. So I'm not convinced that God's whole plan for sexuality is good or better than what the culture tells me is good, a good plan
Hmm.
for sexuality. So I think there are a lot of Christians and Catholics that are in that space of like, I'm willing to give God a lot of areas, but this one I feel like I can steward better than he can.
So then how do we wrestle with that? Because that seems to be what your mission is
Yeah.
if we can name it in the sense that hopefully some people in the nation might be listening to this and think, okay, I resonate with an aspect of this, or maybe all of it so far. That
Yeah.
totally, I can't see this as something that's intended for good, or even at face value has any goodness in it. So how do I wrestle? What do I need to do that different in my wrestling, and then coming to grips with it?
Yeah. Corey, I think one of the things that we do, hopefully, as communicators, whether it's podcasting or writing, is we put into words the experience of people that, and where we don't, where you're even listening to this going, wow, yeah, I feel that. I've never said that out loud. I've never acknowledged it, but I resonate with that.
Hmm.
And so I really do think that's a first step. Most of us are
Yeah.
creating this divide between God and sexuality at a very subconscious level without ever even considering that we've done that.
Hmm.
So that is a huge first step, which creates for a person who would claim to trust in God, it creates a cognitive dissonance. Well, why wouldn't I trust him with this? And if I do believe he is the creator, then why don't I apply that to my sexuality? And if I say that the purpose of somebody who is a Christian is to follow Jesus or follow Christ, then why do I not follow him with this area of my life? And boy, I think if we're on any journey of faith, all of us can resonate with that in a lot of different topics. But I want to force that question for us related to sexuality because we so infrequently are actually asking that. And so it begins with that question really. And what the book Surrender Sexuality is really take somebody through the journey of all the different elements that that's going to entail. Because I think we first go to behavior, like if you've grown up in any form of church setting or religious family, it seems like all the conversations about what do I do differently, like what behaviors do I avoid, what is sin, instead of the deeper level of what's underneath all that.
Well, and that's kind of the way I would capture a lot of the ones we might struggle with in our areas. For sure, our sexuality is it if it is addressed at all, it's addressed in the what not to do's,
Right.
not the what to do's or what to believe or how to grow in comfort with or how to own and identify with. Because that seems to be where you're coming from in in this aspect that it's shifting and challenging. This is a part of my identity, isn't it? That
Yeah.
it's part of who I am.
Well, I mean, if we look at behavior is always kind of the metaphorical tip of the iceberg. It's what we can
Hmm.
see and what gets our attention, but behavior comes from all the things underneath. And like identity, like who do I believe I am? What do I think it is to be a whole person? And most of us are living in identities that are very much shaped by kind of the cultural thinking of the day, not by what we claim in terms of our religion. So most of us are living by the belief that I am a person who is clouded in shame. Like I'm never
Hmm.
going to be free from my sin struggle. I can never get quite away from the mistakes I've made in my past, the ways I've hurt people. And so you live in a shame identity. Again, we don't walk around thinking this, but
Mhm.
It's sort of like there's this cloud over you where, you might say to your neighbor, like, I really believe that God forgives us. But when it comes to you, do you really believe that God has forgiven you and
Right.
freed you? The
Right.
answer is no. So it can be
Right.
that, we live in a very postmodern culture that tells you that you create your own identity
Mhm.
instead of looking to our creator to define what it is to be human. And so I think a lot of people are caught in that. So it's identity. I talk about surrendered thinking, like what is the purpose of our sexuality? The culture has a very different answer to that than the Bible does. So it's a whole journey. It's not just one thing.
Always. And so, and that's the thing I love about like a systemic view and
Yeah.
framework is that I can look at a bunch of the different aspects that create this thing and just work on a couple or one, and
Hmm.
it'll spin into the others. But one of the things that jumps out to me, Julie, is this wrestle of, tell me if I'm off base and help me kind of run in. Let's go deeper into why this may happen among believers. Is one of the shortcomings, I guess you could say, is it's never, when you're talking about sexuality as it pertains to Scripture, it's never really written out clearly of here's what you should do. Here's what this looks like. It gives you ideas and frameworks, absolutely. And then there's also several in there of the don'ts. But and it doesn't seem like the human condition is, I mean, that's our wrestle with faith in a lot of ways, that I want to be told what to do.
Sure. Yeah.
And then when you tell me what to do, I'm going to tell you, don't tell me what to do. But what is it? What is it that makes this such a troublesome aspect as it pertains to bringing spirituality, religion, Christianity to this aspect of our life?
Yeah. Well, I guess I would subtly push back on the fact that the Bible doesn't tell us what to do. I think we can look at, for example, in a marriage relationship, you can look at the whole book of Song of Solomon, which
Mm-hmm.
is pretty instructive on
Mm-hmm.
what healthy sex can look like and should look like. But I would say one of the reasons that we find little teaching on the Bible related to sexuality is because we assume that only verses or passages that say the word sex apply to our sexuality.
Perfect. Thank you for that.
And we don't do that with anything else. Like, we don't look at our money and say, well, the only verses that give me instruction on what I do with my money have to have the word money in them.
Right.
We can look at, for example, Romans chapter 12, verses 1 and 2, that talk about like offering yourself as a living sacrifice, holy and acceptable to God, which is your reasonable act of worship.
Mm-hmm.
And say, okay, well, that applies to everything. It applies to money, it applies to sexuality. Like, what does it look like for me to offer myself as a living sacrifice? How does that change the way I steward my sexuality if I really see myself as belonging to God?
Perfect.
So, or, you take a passage like Philippians chapter 2 that talks about don't look out for your own interests only, but look out for the interests of others.
Mm-hmm.
Like, well, then how does that apply to a sexual relationship? That I'm to be self-giving, like I'm supposed to care about my spouse as much as I care about myself. Or same thing in Ephesians chapter 5 where Paul tells husbands, like, love your wife as you love your own body, and nurture, like the way you nurture your body, nurture your wife. Well, what if we
Mm-hmm.
were to apply that directly to how a husband loves his wife sexually? So I think there's lots of teaching that has
I love
gone,
it.
like, it's not been covered and applied, but it's the character and the spirit of how we're to steward our whole life.
Right. And that's so spot on, Julie. So thank you for that, because this is one of those aspects that how we started the conversation, to where I can see it in a lot of areas. But when I get to the deeper areas, like, I don't know if it applies here, though. I don't know if it goes that deep. I can do it with my friendships and my overall demeanor with those around me and my neighbor and all these things. But when it gets deep down into my intimate relationships, man, I don't know.
Yeah.
So I so appreciate that, because I think that's part of what the wrestle is. And that's the way I kind of have framed the way you're working, is just help people wrestle better, face the wrestle with myself, wrestle with my relationship with God. That's okay, because we grow. I mean, you and I are in the same camp in that regard, that conflict, that struggle is how we evolve and become better because we have a standard we're striving towards. We have something better beyond us that we're striving towards.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you're saying like, I don't know if I can take those principles and apply them to my sexuality, then great that you're saying that, but follow it up with, well, why?
Right.
What's the fear? Or, where's the stronghold? And most of us, again, we have that under the surface, but we never bring it up and
Hmm.
say, well, like I remember as a kid experiencing trauma and abuse, and I've never been able to trust anyone, including God, with this area of my life. I have to keep myself safe. Okay, well,
Hmm.
let's wrestle with that. Or I just don't trust that God will make me happy. I just think if I really give my life to Him, He's going to make me miserable. Okay, well then let's wrestle with that. And I've had those. I've
Yeah.
had,
That's
yeah,
the
I've
idea
had,
of like suffering and struggle seems to be like an expected way of life rather
yes.
than the joy and the grace and the freedom that is offered.
Right. Okay, so let's talk about that. Like I have conversations with people on that level all the time, and it pushes us to grow in our faith. And it
Hmm.
pushes us to become integrated people instead of compartmentalized people.
Hmm.
And I really have enough confidence in God, in His Spirit, and in His Word, His truth, that if we wrestle, like He's going to help us through that. We're not just going to be stuck.
Right. And that's, I even love when you first started this little conversation here on the why, asking the pointed questions of what's the stronghold, what's the issue, what's the something buried deep in there. And there's even a softer element I think that could be beneficial is the question of what would it look like if I did
Yeah.
actually, because sometimes just that curiosity stance opens up a wide avenue that I could explore because it's just stuff I've never, like we mentioned earlier, you're talking about, I've never actually paused and pondered or asked the wondering question.
Yeah, I love
And
that.
and what if I
Yes.
did? What if I did actually believe this? What if I did actually act in accordance with the
Yes.
principles and the ideas that are talked about throughout scripture in this area of my life too? That
Yeah.
would be an interesting experiment, and
Yes, it
then all of a
would.
sudden you can see where that takes you. And that's a
Huh?
whole different level of experience that you have waiting for you.
Yeah. Yeah. And at the end of the day, like I really believe from the framework of the Bible that we're not ultimately living for this world. The best marriage, the best relationship, the best sex is temporary. Like we before we started this conversation, you and I were just talking about our aging parents. Like we're seeing our parents get to that stage of life where they're losing everything. And they're
Mhm.
not worried about a great sex life anymore. They're worried about like remembering their keys or remembering who you are. So when we look at this perspective of what really matters, are we really investing our lives in the things that count? And in the process of surrendering our relationships to God, our shame to Him, our wounds to Him, our marriage to Him, that is actually forming a character that will survive the test of time.
Yeah, and that's the whole thing that is. Do you think this equates to, quick little detour? I don't know if this will
Sure.
land correctly or
Yeah.
not in the way I'm thinking of it, but there's this element of, it seems like the world has proposed this idea that happiness is the point, is the end game.
Hmm.
But what's actually a better accurate depiction is more the idea of happiness or joy, if you go scriptural in a sense. That comes along with something that's even bigger. That
Yeah.
that's I have a bigger meaning I'm after, and then joy and happiness come with it. They're not the point of it.
Right. They're the byproduct. Yeah. And that's really what the scripture would tell us, that and I can't remember who first said it, but they essentially said if you aim at happiness, you'll never get it.
Yeah.
But if you aim at a full life, if you aim at a purposeful life and blessing other people, you'll get happiness thrown in. So, yeah, it's supposed to be a symptom of a life that has intimacy and communion with God and is walking with kind of that integration of what it is that our Creator created us to do.
So, from your experience, because I know you've been in the field, you're not just a podcaster and an author. So, I know you work in the trenches with couples. When you get a couple that really does, or an individual, husband or a wife, gender is not specified here, that actually starts asking some pointed questions about their sexuality,
Hmm.
about how they make that in line with their faith and with their belief, and they actually start pondering and addressing some of these things we've been talking about. What have you seen that they most often will experience? What would be kind of that what would happen next for them?
Yeah, I think first of all, there's sort of like a freedom of, wow, that's what's been holding me back, or I'm allowed to say that out loud, or God won't get mad at me if I ask that question, or if I acknowledge this or the other thing. So all those questions were always there, but
Hmm.
when we bring them to the surface and we give ourselves permission and the words to go deeper, I do think that like there's freedom in living an uncompartmentalized life.
Hmm.
So I think that would be the first step. I think another thing is that the individual and then the couple begin to view sexuality as a journey and not as an event. It's not just, okay, we need to have sex because we haven't had it in a while or because you're asking for it. It becomes, I'm on a journey of discovering my sexuality and what it means and how to be whole, and you're on a journey as well, and we get to share that those journeys together. So there's a richer intimacy that develops between the couple.
And have you seen that as that process is unfolding? Have you seen that there can be some disruption in the couple when one person actually starts doing it, but maybe the other is a little more reluctant, or has been applying for it all the time, and now all of a sudden they're starting to get what they say they want, and sometimes that disrupts things too.
Yeah, you're saying that because I'm sure you've seen it. You know, I
I've
sometimes,
lived it. I've lived it
yeah,
as
sure,
well.
yeah.
So let's just be
And
honest here.
feel free to share. Feel free to share. Yeah, absolutely. Like, I think we're so trained to think of sex as an activity that when it all of a sudden becomes something deeper and richer, initially it's kind of like, well, why can't we just have fun? Why do we have to talk about this or think about it? Why does it have to be so heavy? And I think when we get into those deeper places, sometimes the activity actually needs to stop for a while in
Hmm.
order for us to reestablish healthy intimacy. For example, let's say that a wife is wrestling with some of these things, and through these ponderings, like she's never really loved sex. She does it because she's sort of supposed to have to. It's what marriage requires and what her husband wants her to do. And when she looks at these deeper places, she begins to realize that, yeah, I always feel objectified by my husband. Like, I feel like he doesn't want me, he wants my body. And if I go even further than that, I've always felt that way. And I don't really know that God wants me to enjoy this. I don't know how to enter into it. Well, if that couple begins just doing sex as normal, it's not going to work anymore because she's taking a step back, and then she's going to invite him into that journey. Like, I want you to understand my heart. I want you to understand what I'm wrestling with. And initially, he might be upset. Like, why can't we just keep going the way it was? It's working for me. But if he will receive that invitation and actually make him reflect on, well, why is sex important? And have I been objectifying my wife? And do I really want to know her heart? If he is willing to go down that road with her and start his own journey of going deeper, now this couple has the opportunity to build something really, really rich.
Yeah, that's the depth. Then that you start moving beyond the act, and that's about the people involved more so than what you do or don't do, because it's your presences, it's your spirits, it's your energies, it's your
Hmm.
seeing and being seen. It's all of that starts to get unraveled and then put together more deeply,
Yes.
because it's so much more profound
Yeah.
in
And
the
then
moments that you get to experience.
if I could add even another layer to it, and this I know is going to freak a lot of people out, but really to begin to acknowledge the presence of God.
Hmm.
Like, I think I realized this probably 15 years into marriage. Like, subconsciously, I really believe that God looked the other way when my husband and I had sex. Sort of like he was like, all right, like, I can't see this. Gabriel,
Hmm.
tell me when they're done. But But again, like, that is such bad theology. Like, the scripture
Yes.
tells us there's nowhere we can go where he doesn't exist. What is it like to actually call on God for help in this area of
Hmm.
our life? For a couple to pray together about their sex life, to thank God for the pleasure in it and the intimacy in it. And that's something it took my husband and I time to learn to do, and other couples. But, as I've challenged them, at first it kind of throws them off. But once they really begin to understand that, there's even a deeper level of integration.
Yeah, and that's an excellent exploratory area from what we were just talking about 10 minutes ago in today's show of it's a different way to explore what is it that makes it to where I don't bring the because if I actually were to because I've had the same thing too where I've mentioned to couples, have you guys ever prayed before?
Hmm.
Or even during, if
Yeah.
something goes sideways and what if one of you prayed, and
Hmm.
the facial expressions of some of them are like, what are you talking about?
Yeah.
But then if you actually ask yourself the questions of, okay, if I was going to pray for my sex life before the next encounter, like right before it, what would I pray?
Hmm.
Right?
Yeah.
Even that makes me wrestle with what do I want to bring? How do I articulate what it is I'm after, what's holding me back, what this
Hmm.
experience means, what it can create with a presence in the relationships of each of us and God. All of it is another entry into a whole world to explore of why I have had trouble surrendering this.
Yeah. Yeah. So true. And even, like, I remember reading a quote from Martin Luther, and he said something to the effect that, like, sex never happens with some level of sin. And at first, when I read that, I'm like, what? Like, that's pretty negative. But I think that's one of the things that we wrestle with as human beings is, is there always some level of, like, lust? Is there always some level of not having my mind in the right place, not treating my spouse with perfect love?
Hmm.
And if we're really honest, we're like, well, yeah. But what we believe in Christianity is that Jesus redeems all of that, that
Hmm.
he doesn't expect us to be perfect. He actually inhabits us and trains us in
Hmm.
holiness. And so I think there's that disconnect for the couple that's praying before sex. To your point, what are we praying for? And can I honestly say that there's nothing in me that I don't need to surrender to God, even as I'm engaging with my spouse and enjoying this gift? It's so complicated. Um,
Because that's kind of like what you alluded to, which thank you for the vulnerability of God's kind of just go ahead and take a break, go have a cup of coffee,
we'd
God. We're
rather
gonna
him.
we're gonna we're going to do this over here and then we'll come back and worship with you in a little bit, right? But and so it's just that element of, okay, wait, what is it? Because even if people that are listening to this and they've gotten this far through the show and they don't have a Christian leaning, a faith
Hmm.
leaning, I think most everybody I've ever come across that are listeners or clients at least have some sort of a spirituality understanding of there's something else that connects us, that there's another thing. And we're obviously talking about it in the triune God, but there's this element of we can still taste this and experience that. And we can all still wrestle, at least from my experience. I can still wrestle with how do I incorporate that aspect too, of just beyond just the mental and the physical, the relational, the
Hmm.
dynamic of the third, if you will, with the that our union is, our covenant is.
Yeah. Yeah, there's something inherently spiritual about our sexuality. And I can't describe it. I think, like, religions all notice that.
Hmm.
Even when you look at what the Bible might call idolatrous religions of the past or ancient religions, like, there's there's always in those cases the perversion of sexuality, like temple prostitutes, or there's something inherently sexual or spiritual about our sexuality. It's not the
Hmm.
same as what we eat or exercise. So yeah, I think even a person that wouldn't acknowledge God or doesn't ascribe to Christianity or anything like that would say, yeah, there's something about it that is
Yeah.
intangible.
Yeah, and I think that's the ones where I attribute that to, if we look back in our history as a married couple, what are the readily remembered experiences together with our spouse
Hmm.
sexually? They're often ones where you look back and it was something that was beyond just the feelings. It
Yeah. Oh,
was a
yeah.
wow, what was that? And then it was like the higher desires are constantly, how do we recreate that every single time? And
Hmm.
yeah, good luck on every single time.
That's why
It's
did
an
they come to you?
well, but even still, good luck, because it's an
Yeah.
element of presence and engagement and all of it. You know, it's who we are and how we're showing up. But though I think even if we're honest with ourselves, we can attribute that to where, okay, I get what you guys are talking about here. I get what the
Hmm.
point of this book is
Hmm.
that's moving it out into something broader that I then bring back into my core to make whole.
Yeah, for sure. And again, it's so much more than the action. It is our identity, it's our worldview and framework. It's what we do with the evil that's within us, whether
Right.
that's lust or selfishness or ways that we've hurt people. Like, how do we reconcile that with wanting to be a good lover, and wanting to be a good spouse? Like, all of that is psychological and emotional and spiritual.
Yeah, and that's so good. So, Julie, how can people find this book and then the authentic intimacy and all the work that you do?
Yeah, you can find the book really anywhere that you buy books. Any online retailer is going to have it. It's called Surrendered Sexuality. And then, probably the best way to plug in with what we're doing, since you're listening to a podcast, is our podcast. It's called Java with Julie. And you've been a guest on that several times. So, always great conversations with you.
Well, thank you so much. I so love the work, and kudos on continuing to drive forward with the manner in which you do, Julie. So, thank you for the time.
Thanks for letting me share.